Today we're going to be talking about sex-linked genetics. And so I have a couple of questions to get us started thinking about sex-linked genetics, which you're probably like, what the heck is that, Ms. Frankson? Well, let me give you an example. A male with one gene for colorblindness is colorblind. A female with one gene for colorblindness is not colorblind. Well, why? A male with one gene for hemophilia has hemophilia. A female with one gene for hemophilia does not have hemophilia. So again, our question is why? So the answer is that some genes are on sex chromosomes. What are the sex chromosomes? They're the chromosomes that determine sex. And we're talking about an anatomy. Right? So we're talking about male anatomy and female anatomy. That's what we refer to when we refer to as sex, which is different from gender. Gender is whether you identify as male or female. So some genes are on sex chromosomes. The female, typically somebody who has female anatomy, has two X chromosomes. Typically somebody who's got male anatomy has an X and a Y chromosome. And so we can see that, remember 46 chromosomes, we can see that here. Somebody with male anatomy typically has an X and a Y chromosome. Somebody with female anatomy has two X chromosomes. So if we take a look here, male typically are XY, female are XX, and these are our sex chromosomes. Now the X chromosome, if you take a look, it's a lot bigger than the Y chromosome. So there's actually a lot more traits and genes on the X chromosome than the Y. And most of these diseases we're going to be talking about are actually on genes that are on the X chromosome. And because they're on the X chromosome, we call them sex-linked because they are on a sex chromosome, a chromosome that determines somebody's sex. Here's a list just showing you the difference between the X and the Y gene. Or X and Y chromosome. The X chromosome has 153 million letters, base pairs. The Y chromosome is 50 million, so only a third as many. And these are all the genes that have been identified, so a lot more on the X chromosome than the Y. All the diseases we're going to be talking about today, or all the conditions, are going to be on the X chromosome. So that's what we're going to write in our chart. Genes are on the X chromosome. So sex-linked means the genes are on the X chromosome. In all the conditions that we're going to be talking about today, normal is going to be dominant. So in this case, normal, I'm going to assign a capital letter. Color blindness or whatever trait we're talking about is going to be a lowercase letter. And so I'm going to have us write that in our little chart as well. So dominant equals normal. Recessive is our disease, whatever that disease might be. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. We are going to write these a little bit different because we have to remember they're on the X chromosome, and well, males, they have only one X chromosome. And so what happens here is we write all of the gene letters, so like that B for being normal or colorblind, we write it next to the X to remind ourselves that it's on the X chromosome. Don't worry about writing anything yet. Notice this is a female. Why? They have two X's. All of these are females. So if they have two capital letters, they're going to be normal, not have colorblind. If they've got one of each letter, still normal because normal is dominant. But if they have two recessive, then they're going to be colorblind. With males, it's a little different because males only have one X chromosome. They have an X and a Y. So they only have one of these letters. The Y gene or the Y chromosome does not get a letter because these genes are only on the X chromosome. So a male, if they're normal, they just have the capital B. If they're colorblind, they have the lowercase b. So going back to, well, why is it that if a male only has one copy, they end up with the gene? Well, they don't have two X chromosomes, so they don't get two copies of the gene, they only get one. Let's go ahead and write these down, and I know it's a little bit small, so I'll read them to you. But a normal female, we're going to write X with a big N, X with a big N, and we write them kind of like an exponent, like how you would in math. Or they could have a X with a big N and X with a little n. They would be normal, and because they have two X's, they are a female, or typically have female anatomy at birth. X with two little n's means they're going to have the disease, and we'll talk about a couple different diseases that they could have. Typically, these are going to be recessive. There are very few where they're dominant. If it's a male, they're going to have an X and a Y, so they're only going to get one letter because the X gets a letter, the Y doesn't. So they could either have X with a big N and then their Y, and they would be normal, or X with a little n and Y, and they would be diseased. So what are some examples of sex-linked traits then? Well, the first one we have is something called red-green color blindness, which is super, super, super common. Somebody who has red-green color blindness, instead of seeing the picture on the left, they see the picture on the right. And if somebody has red-green color blindness, they would actually see these two pictures as the same thing. So the red and the green look the same color. They can't tell the difference between red and green very easily. So if we take a look at what's happening here, in a normal person, they make all of these regular proteins, they're called rods and cones, in the back of the eye, and they work normally. They can detect red and green and blue colors. In somebody who's colorblind, one of their genes, they've got a mutation in one of their genes, and so it's either in their red cone or their green cone. It doesn't work properly, and so as a result, red and green look the same. So let's go ahead and write down, this is one example, red-green color blindness, meaning you can't see the difference between red and green. Another example, hemophilia. Hemophilia is a blood clotting disorder. Whenever you get a cut, your blood, it stops bleeding eventually, and you get a scab. Somebody with hemophilia, that scab doesn't work. It doesn't make a scab. And so you just keep bleeding and bleeding. And so in hemophilia, what they're missing is one of the proteins that helps you form that scab, that clot. Okay? And so they keep bleeding. So hemophilia is one example of another condition that's on the X chromosome. So all of these X chromosome diseases are going to be way more common in males than in females. All right, third one, muscular dystrophy. Basically, what happens is you get progressively weaker in your muscles. So the mutations interfere with the production of proteins needed to form healthy muscle. So you're not able to form muscle very well. And as a result, your muscles get weaker and weaker. This is a simplified picture, but normally we would have this protein that connects here, and we're talking this is in our muscle cell. In muscular dystrophy, they're missing this protein, and so their muscles don't work very well, and a lot of times they're wheelchair bound. So muscular dystrophy. And the last example then is something called male pattern baldness. You may have seen somebody who looks like this. This is classic male pattern baldness. Happens a lot in males. They get bald, and there's a specific way that they get bald. It starts here and kind of on their temples and then the top of their head. This is because of mutation. And basically this mutation causes testosterone to be converted into a different substance, and then basically it's this whole chain reaction, and it just triggers the hair follicles to shrink, and then you don't have hair. And so it's all about those proteins, right? There's a mutation in the gene, and something's happening that's making this protein different, and now we've got short hair. And so again, somebody who's got a capital letter, a normal gene will be normal, but somebody who has a recessive gene is going to have that baldness pattern. So male pattern baldness. So we're just going to run through a practice problem really quickly, and then we'll be done. So how do we do these problems? It says a normal man and a woman with hemophilia plan on having a baby. Well, the dominant one's always going to be normal. Recessive is going to be the whatever the disease. So in this case, it's hemophilia. We've got to assign letters. So this still looks normal. Normal is going to get a capital letter. Capital H. Hemophilia is going to get a lowercase h. You can use whatever letter you want. If you want to use A, B, Q, whatever letter. Sometimes people like to use N because big N means normal. 2 little n's means they're not normal. That would be okay. So it says a normal man. So remember, Dad, the man, has to have an X and a Y. And he's going to be normal. So he's going to be XY and he's going to have a big H. So this is going to be Dad's genes. The woman has hemophilia. So the mom has to have 2 X's. In order to have hemophilia, those are both recessive genes. So she's going to have little h, little h. So we have the parents. We do the same thing. We just have kind of the big X and the little letter here. So they're going to go together. So we're going to put the egg, the sperm, they each get either an X with that little letter or a Y. Now we put them in our Punnett square. So remember, mom's goes on one side, the X with the little h, the X with the little h. So the X's are always going to have a little letter with them. And then we're going to fill in the Punnett square. And so if we take a look here, the normal offspring. So when we look, we've got to look and see, do any of them have capital letters? If they have a capital letter, they're going to be normal. So see how these 2 have capital letters? They're going to be normal. So that would be 2 out of 4 are normal. How many are going to have hemophilia? Well, these guys don't have a normal capital letter, so they're going to have hemophilia. So that would be 2 out of 4. Let's say I ask about the girls. Well, how many girls are there in this Punnett square? There's only 2, right? So how many of the girls are going to be normal? Well, out of the 2 girls, both of them are going to be normal because they have a capital letter. So this would be 2 out of 2. And boys, I've got 2 boys. So out of 2 boys, how many are going to be normal? Well, none of them have a capital letter, so 0 out of 2 would be normal.